So, Berto, let's take a break from talking about music and let's answer some emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk. I'm a therapist, and I'm also a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I work hard every day to turn orange into black.
So you and I just got done talking for 2 hours about music. We're both getting back into recording and publishing. And if people don't know, I started my music YouTube channel just like a few weeks ago. It's just called Kirk Honda Music. Where is your music going to be soon?
It's a channel called Ricercar. But it's not, it doesn't have anything yet. So as soon as I post...
How do you spell that?
So it's R, it's like rice, Ricercar. Ricercar, yeah.
And what does that mean?
Well, so it is, it means to search. It comes from researche. And it is what the term was used for a fugue back in Bach's time, I guess. And it's very interesting because like a fugue is this very like sort of intellectual kind of composition where the melodies and the counter melodies like work together. And so the idea is like you were searching for like this ultimate mix of the voices together, you know. Anyways, but I've always been fascinated with, because I did you ever read the Golden like Gödel Escher Bach, the Golden Braid book? It's this,
that creativity book?
Well, it's a book about like all these stories related to music and
oh no, I haven't.
Philosophy and things. Anyways, in college, I was reading that, and they talked about this, and they talked about Bach's musical offering where he improvised this 3-part fugue. And so I was always kind of fascinated with that. So what I wanted to do is start a channel where I want to discuss songwriting and music, and it's a search for like these aspects of how does one write a song? Where does the inspiration come from? What do the lyrics mean?
So you're going to publish your music and have...
Yeah, I'm going to publish my music videos from my songs, and then also discuss both those songs as well as other songs that I like and how they're written and things like that.
Yeah. So Berto and I are getting back into composition and performance and recording and publishing.
Yeah.
We've been doing it our whole lives because, you know, we're that type of people.
Yeah.
And it's fun. And you can find that stuff there.
Yeah.
I plan on my channel to not have any talking. I want it so that, because I talk all the time.
Sure.
But also I want the channel to be, to have the possibility if people wanted to listen to every song on the channel and have it be uninterrupted music, you know what I mean? Where they can just click on repeat.
And it just keeps going.
Yeah, there's no like intros or outros or talking episodes. You know, maybe I'll have a second channel where I talk about stuff like that. But anyway, anonymous patron and YouTube member, she wrote in and said, "My husband and I think it is best for our family to leave the United States. My husband and I think it's best for our family to leave the United States. We have a 10-year-old. What can we do to minimize the psychological effects, especially for our son, the 10-year-old son? It's a big transition with us needing to learn another language. Also, his grandparents, I think the son's grandparents, his grandparents wouldn't be there, and it would be arduous for them to visit due to the distance and them being in their 70s already. He spends a lot of time with one grandma in particular. Any input appreciated. Thank you." End of email. So we don't know why anonymous patron and YouTube member wants to leave the United States, but we could take some guesses as to what is motivating that. And so she and her husband and her 10-year-old son are sounding like they're going to move pretty far away, new language, away from grandparents, away from community, not only for themselves, but also for the son, you know, friends and familiarity and that sort of thing. You, Berto, were contemplating this, and I'm guessing thought about the impact that it would have on your children. Yeah. What advice do you have for her?
This hits so close to home. It's hitting me right now. Like it's hitting me upside the head. I also have a 10-year-old. I also have a 14-year-old, almost 15. And I also had last year, I guess, at this point. Last year, I had been seriously contemplating, like, oh, is it time to leave? Like, never thought I'd get to a point. I really never thought I would get to a point in my life where I'd be like, I might have to leave the United States. Like, that's crazy. It's insane. Also, I have relatives that have been having this discussion too, In my case, it's sort of even more complicated for me lately, because when I started having this thought process, it was in the summer, and I was thinking, well, I guess I could always go to Colombia because I'm a dual citizen, and I speak Spanish, and most of my family speaks, my wife and kids speak Spanish pretty well, and we have tons of family. But come to find out now, it's like, well, I don't know, Colombia might be a very dangerous place to go to as well, because we might attack them. The U.S. might attack Colombia too. So I don't know. And also, I started just, we had conversations about this and stuff, but I started like thinking, okay, well, maybe it's better to have a plan, like figure out what my plans are, like what do I do in case of blah, like what are my things. But I didn't want to do anything drastic, like overreacting or anything drastic. And that's got to be balanced with that. There is some truth to, at some point it might be, you might have waited too long to take action sometimes, so there's always that. So in my case, you and I had this conversation about how to reduce the anxiety or even how to reduce the feeling of paralysis, right? Such that instead of oh my God, everything feels so threatening. What do I do? I don't know what to do. And then you're kind of caught in a loop. The idea of well, actually write down what would you do? Or what would be your plan? Or what are the things you can control? What are the things you can do right now? What makes us feel like we have some agency? And it doesn't solve the problem magically. But as we discussed, and by the way, I was fairly skeptical when we were first discussing this, because I'm like, yeah, I guess I can do that. But the problem doesn't go away. And it doesn't. We don't magically remove rulers just by making plans. But in my case, that process gave me some feeling of that agency, some feeling of okay, yes, this is not a good situation, but I can have discussions with my loved ones about hey, well, what are our thresholds? What
Right.
are our plans?
Right. You're describing it pretty well, but just to summarize, and I'm really glad that it was helpful, and it is not only just making me feel good because I'm your friend, but also because the conversation I had with you and others feels it's a minefield to have these kinds of recommendations for people that I make, because it could be taken as dismissive or something like that. And that's not what I'm trying to do. And to hear that it actually wasn't received that way, and also even potentially kind of worked. The point that you're reiterating, that I just want to double reiterate, is that when we are in those situations, we can become paralyzed and catastrophize and stuck and stew in the loop of anxiety. And sometimes that's just inevitable, because that's just the nature of this scenario, because it's utterly terrifying. There's not much one can do. And the onslaught of danger and threat and harm is happening. But there are also times where we're doom scrolling and we're in that loop in our heads, and we have an amorphous set of solutions, maybe just one, like moving out of the country, right?
Right.
And the recommendation that I have with myself and with others, clients, is to take some time to systematically go through it and have less paralysis, more analysis, right? That doesn't take away the problem, and it might not be fruitful, but without that, there's no opportunity to break out of that loop. And hopefully it'll bear fruit, in that you actually go through it, say, okay, what's the threat and what can I do? And here's the 5 things that I brainstorm, and with additional brainstorming, what I can do. I can move, I could continue to vote, I could speak out, I could protest, I could look into donating to a legal organization, I could, become a campaign manager for another politician. You just start going through all things, and these are the things that we can do. And then you start to extrapolate from that, predict, of those things, what outcome would I be hoping for? What's the likely outcome from these things? And just start walking myself. If I did move, where would it be exactly? How would that work out? Because if you're stuck in the paralysis and you have this vague sense of escape of moving, then you might not give yourself the opportunity to walk through it. Like if I did move, what would that look like? Maybe at the end of that analysis, you're like, actually moving is the right thing to do. But you might also find that when you walk through it, you're like, well, that doesn't really solve the problem. It solves the loop that I'm in when I'm doom scrolling at 2 a.m. But when I actually walk myself through it, that doesn't actually solve the problem. I understand why that's what my brain was going to in the moment, but it doesn't actually solve what I'm trying to fix. And then I need to choose my action plan and enact it. And then as I'm enacting it, as I'm experiencing feelings, at least in the immediate future, I want to tell myself, I get it that you're still experiencing anxiety and I'm feeling it and I'll talk about it and I'll process it, but it's already been addressed, self, and therefore I get you, but I've already thought about it and I've worked myself through the different options, and here's what I'm going to do to approach that. It's the same if you had a cancer diagnosis or if your finances were falling apart or something. Like it not only is planning helpful, but also a management system for your emotions so that you aren't in a chronic state of threat and danger and uncertainty and lack of planning and just like paralyzed with like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Literally, a lot of people will stay in that state for years.
Yeah.
That doesn't do well to your mental health.
So this is very important to bring up, especially that aspect of like, it's not guaranteeing an outcome, because when we were first talking about it during the episode that we talked, I was getting a little bit of that in my mind. I was thinking, it was feeling to me. I was like, well, two things. One, as you even pointed out, you have a certain bias in that you don't want me to move. And of course, I don't want to move either.
But to be clear, I know myself well enough to know I had that bias. And when I was talking with you on the air, I was keeping that in check while trying to approach you more objectively.
Right.
You know?
But I don't know that a priori. And when you were first presenting the idea, I remember thinking, like, I didn't like explicitly say these words in my head, but it was something along the lines of like, it sounds like this is a way for me to convince myself that I shouldn't leave. And then as we talked more about it, I started understanding a little better. It's like, oh, okay. This isn't about guaranteeing an outcome or dismissing a reality of a fear.
Because I think most of the time, the supportive thing to say, and maybe sometimes this is the right thing to say, is, yeah, I get it, man. Maybe moving is best. Like, that's as far as people will take it when you vent to them. Or they'll push back a lot of times too. They'll just be like, well, that's a little extreme. Right. Because even as you were presenting this possibility of moving, you had predicted, as you're communicating it to me, that you basically assumed that I would tell you that you're overreacting. You even said that. You said like, oh, you'll probably think I'm overreacting. Right. Not because of me, but because
just in general.
People
like,
tend to. Yeah.
Well, plus it's such a radical situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah. But I didn't do that. And even in my head, I was like, well, if I don't know all the factors that Berto's facing, you know, it would suck for me personally, but what do I know? And so when I was talking with you about it, I was putting aside my own bias around that and trying to, and so often that approach, and maybe my delivery isn't perfect or something, but it can be perceived as a way to dismiss one's feelings, right? But that I was trying to be very clear, and apparently I got it across to you. That it's not. In fact, it might actually result in the end with you breaking out of the paralyzed state and realizing that you should move. Yeah. But you break
clear.
Through the paralyzation is the thing. Yeah.
That was what became clear. So I really actually ended up getting a lot out of that conversation and that sort of system of thinking. In fact, I've also applied that. I didn't mention this to you, I don't think, but I've applied it recently to a different crisis happening with my family that you're aware of. So, okay. So that being said, I want to also emphasize that and you've brought this, you just brought it up as well, that it doesn't mean you don't feel the feelings, but it is that it's the same thing. Like you give the cancer example,
right.
like you're gonna like.
Well,
it's impossible not to feel.
Another
the
way to
feelings.
see it is you're actually feeling the feelings more fully.
Sure.
Because in that anxiety loop, often we're avoiding our feelings. So if you actually, the model, the way that I describe it is you're listening to your feelings. Mm. You're like, what is my feeling telling me?
Right.
The feeling I have is anxiety, tension, worry, threat, danger. That's what this is telling me. I am in danger. Okay, so you listen to that. What is the danger?
That's right.
The danger is the government deporting me and tearing me away from my family, or tearing my family away from me, or showing up and shooting someone in my family in a scuffle with ICE. And so that is the threat. Okay, is that rational? Yes, it's rational. Okay, what do I do about, if I'm going to listen to my feelings, the feelings are telling me to do something. Kirk,
do something.
There's a threat, and the emotion is there to motivate us to do something. Okay, I'm going to listen to my feelings. Okay, what should I do? When you actually walk through that and you actually take action, the feeling goes away.
Right.
The feeling is like, okay, he listened to me.
That's right.
I don't have to alert you anymore.
That's right. And so, like in my case, for example, I've put certain things where I delineated. I'm like, all right, there's this concept of reversible actions, like two-way doors. Like some actions are really hard or impossible to undo. Some actions aren't. So the first thing I decided is like, okay, how many reversible actions could I put into place that still would help me if in case I did at some point have
like
to
getting
move?
your finances in order.
Exactly. So I did several things. I opened up an account in Colombia, for example. I put some money there, so I would have something there. I was like, okay, I already was doing pretty well in terms of debts and things like this, but I'm like, okay, like hardcore, like make sure I have as few dependencies over here as possible. The more extreme things, I haven't gone to that point yet because I haven't felt that my thresholds have been, but it'd be like, okay, I'm actually going to like sell property and rent instead of owning, right?
So
like that kind of
did
thing.
your feelings, reduce, so to speak?
That what reduced was that feeling of paralysis and what the hell am I going to do? What the hell am I going to do? It's more like now, as things are unbelievably sort of escalating, I am revisiting. I'm thinking, okay, well, and adding new variables into the equation. I'm like, oh, is my account in Colombia actually safe? Like these kinds of questions. But that system is reusable, and you kind of like you can iterate on the system. Anyways, if for no other reason that I need to be able to do that because I have also people that depend on me. So if I'm running around like a chicken without a head, then I can't be helping my children, for example. It's like you put your air mask on, right? So. Yeah, so it's a very useful way to approach things, even though it seems counterintuitive.
So, or it's definitely not the way that people typically. So, anonymous patron YouTube member, she's worried about her son. It sounds like her and her family have made the commitment and are wondering how to mitigate the psychological or minimize psychological effects for the 10-year-old boy. And what I'll say to that is that there are many things to consider and many micro and macro considerations that are, I'm guessing, occurring to this anonymous patron and YouTube member that I don't need to say. But one thing that I'll focus on that I have seen a lot in situations like this, where you have a family that's moving to another country that no one in the family speaks the language, particularly the kid, is there's various different approaches to immersion for the child in school, right? Language immersion, acquisition. The typical approach, and I don't know what country you're going to, but the typical approach in the United States and other countries that I see is that you just throw the kid into class. And it's the outcome that they are trying to achieve is fluency in language. And I think I don't know the research, but I'm guessing that with some additional measures, that is the most effective way to reach the outcome the fastest, right? And of course, that's a good outcome to seek, right? Because the kid needs to learn that language. The kid can integrate socially and academically a lot faster, the faster they become fluent with the language. And it's also easily facilitated because school is free in most communities, and so you can just send your kid there, and with some measures and with some awareness, blah, blah, blah. But the downside to that is that for a period of time, maybe months and months, you have a kid who's sitting in class at a time in their life when they're already insecure. I mean, if you just move across town and go to another school,
It's bad enough.
yeah, you're a 10-year-old kid is going is there's going to be psychological effects.
Right.
No friends, bullying, alienation, self-esteem problems, confusion, anger, rage at your parents for putting you in the situation, all sorts of problems, right? And then you add the fact that you're sitting, and I've worked with cases like this where they'll tell me, yeah, I moved to this country from Russia, and I was just sent to class. And although by the end of that year I was speaking English pretty well, for 6 months I was sitting in class not understanding a single thing that anyone was saying or doing. 6 hours a day, and at recess, I sat alone. And in class, I just sat there. I couldn't read the book. I couldn't read the board. I didn't understand the teacher. No one spoke Russian in the entire school. And that traumatized the fuck out of me and gave me some issues about self-esteem, about friends, about language, about agency, about my parents, about society, about everything, and looking back, they'll say the teacher was nice, the kids didn't bully me, but the scenario fucked me up.
Yeah.
And I didn't know at the time. And, my parents were, God bless them, doing everything they can. I mean, what are they supposed to do? They had to work. It was hard. We were, we didn't have a transition period of time. So I don't know what to do about that. I don't know if there are other options.
It depends on how much. So going back to like this kind of way to make a plan and use the plan as the way to tell your brain, hey, we're actually doing something here. For example, let's say that I was like, okay, I think we need to go to Germany. I don't speak any German. I think I do. I speak Mach Schnell or, Guten Morgen.
Heil Hitler.
Yeah, these little common phrases in German. So what would I do? Because that would be my situation, right? My kids don't speak German. I don't speak German. Now, if I felt like I have to leave tomorrow, well, then, yeah, I guess we're screwed, right? Like we have to go deal with it. But if it's more of like, I'm afraid that we're going to maybe have to do that, then maybe part of my planning becomes, okay, well, let's get some software, some German learning software. Let's get some movies, like turn movies to German. Let's take a trip. Let's go take a trip to Germany. Now, maybe we're not privileged enough to have the money to take a trip, but I would see which plans I could start enacting. Like in my case, I have a good friend, Ansgar, who speaks fluent German. So in just my hypothetical, I'd be like, all right, we're gonna start speaking German with Ansgar. Like we're gonna start trying to do things to prepare ourselves for such a jarring change. And it doesn't mean like it's not a magic bullet or something, but it's just like part of the thing of like, what are the things we can enact? What are the plans we can put in place? So we tell ourselves that we are actually having a plan that we're following. Yeah. But it doesn't mean it's going to like, I moved countries multiple times, but in my case, the learning of the language happened when I was very, very little. So it wasn't at a point where everyone's staring at me and wondering why the hell I'm lost. But the moving itself was difficult and traumatic in ways that I probably still yet to fully unpack.
Yeah, imagine if you'd come to the States at 15, when you came to the States permanently, and you didn't speak any English.
Right.
Imagine how horrible.
I don't even understand what that looks like.
You would have shit your pants many times over.
All day long.
For those who know the story. Another thing that pops in my head is some other areas around the world, other countries have expat zones, if you will, or unofficial communities that have English-speaking expats, and they might have schools that have bilingual options or something, So it's just something to think about, because I find that either families don't have the luxury or they don't think about that aspect of language acquisition for the child.
Yeah. It does happen to be, I don't know where they're thinking of moving, but English, there's one lucky aspect, which is English is fairly common in a lot of countries. But like when we go to Colombia, oftentimes my wife is frustrated because she's trying to practice her Spanish, and everyone speaks in English to her.
Well, I had a different experience in Bogota. Mm-hmm. I found that the vast majority of people didn't speak English at all. Which makes sense, right?
Yeah, but like my relative, like my cousins do, and my aunt does, and stuff. But you mean like out and about?
Yeah. Like, remember that experience? I went into that store and I was looking.
Yes.
I was looking for, what was I looking for? I told it on the podcast.
Yeah, it was a clothing thing, right?
Was it?
Or was it?
I was looking for something.
It was clothing.
But, I mean, I remember the gist of the story, which is that I, in a rare moment in Bogota, was not with you.
Right.
And I thought, hey, I can go to the store and get something. It's pretty simple. And I walked into the store. It's sort of like a small drugstore kind of thing. It had a lot of random stuff in it,
Right.
But, good new stuff. And I was looking for something, and someone came up to me and asked me, what I was looking for in very broken English, like really broken English. And, God bless, I don't speak any Spanish.
Yeah.
So I tried in my broken English kind of way to explain. And oh no, okay, here's the story. It's all coming back to me. I did not need anyone to help me.
Oh, okay.
I think I was just looking.
Okay.
I think that's what I was trying to tell him.
Okay.
People that remember this story from the podcast are probably...
So maybe you're just browsing.
Right. So someone comes up to me, like a younger clerk, and, says something in Spanish or something, and I'm like, I'm American, I speak English. And then the guy's like, oh, just a second.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh, no, don't worry about it. I'm just looking. But he doesn't understand me.
Right.
So he goes and gets another employee.
The bilingual employee.
Not necessarily. So the two of them come over.
Okay.
And the other person in, a little bit of English asks me what I'm looking for. And I'm like, oh, I'm just looking. And she looks at me with kind of a confused face. And I'm like, oh, how do I say? And so I start pantomiming. I'm just looking. I'm just, I'm trying to communicate.
Glasses. You need glasses. You're trying to buy sunglasses.
Right. So they start thinking I'm asking for something.
Right.
And then we're kind of going back and forth. And
he lost his prescription. He doesn't have his prescription.
I'm literally just wanting them to leave me alone. You know what I mean?
So comical, dude.
And she's like, and they're trying to be so helpful.
It's a Kirby's.
And then
they're like,
okay, well, just a sec. And I'm like, okay, we'll get someone else. So they go into the back and they get like their manager, and now there's a third person.
Oh my God.
And she speaks a little bit more English, but again, not enough to understand and I think in that moment, I think from my memory, I realized that the phrase I'm just looking
doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't translate, right? Because that isn't literally what I would be, if I was trying to tell like an alien what I'm doing, I would be wanting to say, I don't need any help.
Right.
I am just looking at what you have, but I don't intend on buying anything, and I'm not looking for anything in particular.
Right. Because if I think in Spanish, if I'm speaking in Spanish and I am there and I am just looking, and like, se te ofrece algo, they would say, do you need anything? And I might say, no, gracias. I wouldn't say, solo estoy viendo. That's not a thing you would say. So if they hear looking, it's like, oh, he's looking for something.
Right.
He's looking. What is he? His eyes. Do you need contact lenses?
Right. So the story's all coming back to me, actually. Yeah.
He's lost the contact. Let's start looking on the floor.
And then,
he's lost.
Okay. So then the punchline just occurred to me now too, that at a certain point, after going back and forth with multiple employees, I just gave up and walked out of the store.
Oh my God.
Not as a dick. I was, I was like, this is a lost cause.
And to this day, they tell this story. They're like, this poor man, he was looking for something and we couldn't figure out what it was.
So the notion that everyone speaks English in Bogota is not my experience.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Which, makes sense.
Yeah. I guess it is a biased perspective because...
it was a similar thing in Tokyo, like they notoriously will teach their kids English.
Right.
Like, I don't know the stats, but from my understanding, a lot of Japanese kids are taking English classes from an early age, like several years. But they rarely practice it, from my understanding, the average Japanese. And so when you would try to communicate with people, even in the heart of Tokyo, it was basically impossible, even though they had taken so much English and could probably read English. Having a conversation like this one time I was at a Cold Stone ice cream place, an American, I assume it's an American business. Yeah,
okay.
at least back then. And they were the employee recognized that I was American and asked if I was allergic to peanuts or something like that. And I was trying to communicate that I wasn't, and we could not communicate, like just that simple phrase.
Oh my God, because you're probably like, not allergic with your hand, not allergic. And he's like, oh, no peanuts.
Yeah, right.
Okay, no peanuts for you.
Right.
Like, no, I'm not. It's like, yeah, no, we won't give you any peanuts.
No, it was even more frustrating than that because, when two people don't speak the same language, you don't even understand the basis of what each other's anyway. And there was a lot at stake. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, let's take a break. And when we get back, more emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. I'm pretty sure I have that story right. I worry because...
If it doesn't, it sounds great.
Because I already talked about it on the podcast.
Print the fiction.
But anyway, annual super long-term middle-tier patron Alex from Portland. By the way, if you are middle-tier and up, or if you're a YouTube member and a patron, or you're super long-term, then Stacy puts your emails closer to the top just because, we only have so much time.
Yep.
So annual super long-term middle-tier patron Alex from Portland, he says, I have noticed similarities among dictatorships throughout modern history. I'm wondering if you could talk about the psychology of dictators. To me, they seem to exemplify dark tetrad personality traits. They also seem to incite antisocial behavior among the populace. I was also hoping you could talk about the psychology of people who submit to a dictator. Thanks very much. End of email. So, this topic would require several chapters of deep dive, but for the sake of addressing it to some extent, what can we say in this episode, Berto?
Well, that's an interesting question because on the one hand, they meaning if we think of some of the infamous dictators, they seem to be very full of themselves. Like they are grander than life. They seem to be very interested in power and in being seen in a certain way. They seem to be very sensitive to optics. Now, in many cases, it's kind of hard to tell, but in many cases, it almost seems like they have a sadistic part of their personality, or at the very least, complete lack of care if people suffer extremely. But in some cases, you got to say that seems like they almost want this. So, I would imagine they would check a lot of boxes if you were doing, personality disorder or stuff. The one thing though is in most cases, they have some level of competence, if you will. It's easy to say they were completely incompetent. Look at how they fumbled this battle or this war. But in general, it's like they were somehow able to convince a whole bunch of people to let them be in charge of a whole bunch of more people. And then in many cases, lead them through wars and all these things. It's not a good thing, but it was certainly, it's not something that someone that is constantly dysfunctional can easily pull off. And I'm bringing that in relation to like some of the traits that we see with some psychopathy, where it's like they can't really hold a job and they have a lot of hard time getting along with anyone and stuff like this. But yeah, so my non-clinical analysis would be like, yeah, I bet you they check a whole bunch of boxes, but I don't know that they're all, dark tetrad people.
Yeah. Well, so there's lots to say. Like I said, this to even somewhat get into would require several chapters of deep dive, but to briefly talk about it, I will say the following. One, that many have investigated this before, not only in my field, but in other fields. We have, in my field, many infamous or many prominent authors and publications that are specifically evaluating the personality of people like Hitler or someone. We call these psychohistories. There's other words for it, but it's something that I've done myself, even on this podcast. It's there's disagreement. People will say like, well, you're concluding based on this and that. The Hitler, just as one dictator in the past, has been, there's been a lot of different speculation about what was going on with him. Was it dark tetrad? Was he a pedophile? Did he have syphilis? Was it drug addiction? Was it, narcissism or whatever, and the problem is that we don't have the data, we don't have the individual to evaluate. Plus, the scenario is so specific.
Yeah.
It's similar when we're trying to evaluate the personality of like a mass killer. There's so few of them to quote unquote study, and we're retroactively trying to figure out their personality.
Yeah.
We're piecing together people's reports of them, people's reports of their childhood, and of course everything's filtered through the knowledge that they went on a rampage or that it's Hitler. And so people are going to speak about these individuals differently than they would have in all likelihood if this individual didn't do all these horrific things, So there's that. But if we were to briefly talk about it, and because there's a lot of research on this and there's a lot of thought on it, the first thing we need to do is define dictator, right? So what's one definition of a dictator?
A ruler that wants and acquires absolute control, so that essentially they don't have to be held accountable to a Congress or to other judges or things like this, and therefore they hold the military might, the policing aspect of the country or the state, and they're whatever rule they want to implement, pretty much they can implement. That's generally a thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, good definition. So what dictators in the last 150 years can you name?
So I would certainly categorize Hitler as a dictator, Mussolini, Stalin, Pinochet in Chile, right? Pretty sure Erdogan or something like that. Like, okay, now I'm getting into the territory where I don't know all the names. But those are some of the most obvious ones I know.
And some others that Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, Idi Amin, Castro. Some would argue Putin is a dictator, but it's hard to know exactly how the government works. But
I don't think it's that hard.
Well, there are full dictators like Hitler or Stalin, or
where the pretense is gone, I suppose.
Yeah, where influence, like, does Putin have total power, seemingly, but how much influence does his cabinet or do other oligarchs have? It's just, we just don't know.
It's a little harder to tell. I suppose you're right that if you're putting them on a diagram, you have the kind of dictator that they're considered basically gods, literally, right?
Kim Jong-un,
right? And so it's actually like definitely anything they say goes. Although I will say, even in those cases, it's so opaque to us. We don't really know what goes on.
That's the other problem is that, like with Putin, for example, one, it's opaque. Two, it's hard to evaluate people and elements of current history, so to speak, while it's happening.
Right.
In 100 years, when they look back and they gather as much data as possible, they'll have a better idea as to evaluating where Putin is on the. But at any rate, we're identifying some pretty obvious ones. Like you said, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, Mao Zedong, another one. So these are dictators, and
they feel kind of like a cult leader, like a mass cult leader. Like when they say something, everyone in the cult says like, well, we have to follow. That is inviolable. Like we have to follow that decree. We have to do that because that is the dear leader. That is our spiritual leader, etc. Yeah.
Right. So there can be, to varying degrees, a belief system that is injected into the individuals from top to bottom. It's not just fear of being harmed or imprisoned or killed that keeps people in line. It's a cult of personality. It's a cult of nationality, or of this person's a god, or this person.
And not in all cases. Like many dictatorships are just like, no, I just took power by force. And when someone with more force comes around, I'll probably be deposed.
Right. So that's another part of it that we have to think about in terms of the elements of attaining power, holding power, what exactly is happening. So the question about the personality, and specifically about dark tetrad, sadism, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, is this has been looked at by many experts and many historians and many people outside of the industry that would speculate. The thing is that yes, there seems to be the possibility, because again, we can't experiment on humans and societies.
Sure.
So we're just kind of looking at the data and making some suggestions about what we're seeing, that these individual, having at least some of the dark tetrad personality traits, one might help you to be attracted to being a dictator, having influence, having power. It might also alienate you from people around you so that you don't really have anything else to live for. Hitler, for example, when you look at his life, he wasn't happy. Things weren't going well for him. You just wonder if he had a better time socially, or had a family, or
had been a successful artist and had his artwork and his art career took off.
His dad was proud of him, for example. If things would have been different, I'm pretty confident the answer is yes, that history would have been different.
Right.
Now, the other thing to think about is that we tend to reduce the Nazi movement, or the movement politically in Germany, to one person and their motivations. Anyone who understands history at all understands that Hitler did not rise to power by himself. There were elites that, for the most part, propped him up.
We did that deep dive on Nazism, and learned a lot through. I learned a lot through that process of like, but to your point, it's right place, right time in a way. Now, in some cases, it's unfortunate because the right, or I guess the wrong kind of personality individual happens to be at that right place, right time, and capitalizes on it.
Is it likely that a figure would have emerged that was hyper-nationalistic, anti-Semitic, maybe, but at the very least, hyper-nationalistic and simplistic, make Germany great again, literally was what he was attempting to do. Was that movement happening regardless of Hitler? Yeah. So
in fact, in Italy, just next door neighbors, it did happen.
Make Italy great again. Yeah. So what would have happened if Hitler had a dad that was non-abusive and proud of him, or that Hitler had a better love life, for example? What figure would have emerged? Because there would have been a figure. Would the figure have been even worse? Maybe that figure wouldn't invade Russia, for example. Wouldn't declare war on Russia. So that's one thing. Or would that leader not have been as anti-Semitic as Hitler? Would there be anti-Semitism? Yes, but as determined as Hitler was, we don't know. So there's some unknowns here, but the fact is that Hitler didn't create the Nazi Party. That it was going to happen, or something like that was going to happen, or was happening without him, and that he's a part of a system. And not only the party or the movement, but the people were looking for someone like this. It was a burbling of social feeling that was happening after World War I, because after the defeat in World War I, they were humiliated. They felt like the treaty had wronged them. They felt betrayed by their leaders. They were also massively traumatized. I mean, the amount of people, not just Germany, but in Europe, that had been killed in battle or died from disease. I mean, just the amount of trauma untreated that was happening in the 30s, the economic total collapse, not only around the world, the Great Depression, but Germany in particular. I mean, inflation, unemployment, crime, famine, starvation, violence. I mean, Germany in the 30s, before Hitler was ever a thing, was going through a horrific time. You have, Leninism, and right next door, you have all these movements and capitalists and communists and socialists.
So one way to think about it is like you have this petri dish, right? And so of course stuff is going to grow on it. And so in this case, what we're growing a movement, but certain types of individuals are more likely than others to inject themselves into a movement and then capitalize. And some kinds of individuals have the traits that are going to do things like, I will lie, I will cheat, I will not care if bad things happen to one or many. And those types of individuals, in some circumstances, unfortunately rise a lot.
Well, so that's a speculation.
Yeah. No, but I just mean just in terms of like realpolitik or whatever. Like the fact is that most of us have a hard time with making decisions that affect others negatively.
That's speculative, because we're not in a position of leadership that's being called upon to do something. I know you're not going to like this because you haven't liked this in the past, but we have no scientific way of demonstrating that there is a noticeable difference, because the question is if Hitler was the same, had the same personality, and that movement didn't happen, or someone else randomly became the leader and Hitler just never rose to power. He was just a random guy ranting in a pub and no one ever took him up on his fervor or something. What would he have done? What sort of life would he have lived? What sort of behavior would he have?
But you're just talking about Hitler. Yeah. I'm talking about other Hitlers would have stepped in as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those Hitlers are not everywhere.
So any of the Hitlers,
yeah.
How would we, as scientists, not just making shit up, but how would we as scientists evaluate someone like that in terms of their personality? Would we say that they were a little weird, a bit of a loner?
No.
Or would we find clear evidence of dark tetrad traits? We don't know the answer to that question, is the thing.
In that instance, I agree. It's just that, statistically speaking, societies tend, over history, over time, they tend to like sort of function, which means that mostly the average human in a society is afraid enough for whatever number of things they're afraid of, so that they kind of walk the line, right? And in many cases, they won't like break rules all day long. They won't run over people and see if they can get away with it. Right?
Most people have empathy.
But there are some people that don't care about that stuff.
Right.
And my hypothesis is that in a petri dish of instability and all these things, someone who's willing to break the rules, lie, cheat, whatever, and is not afraid of the consequences may have an advantage.
Right. So that is a strong speculation. It stands to reason. It's hard to imagine otherwise, like Stalin.
And we don't have examples otherwise.
Right. That's the point. And we can't experiment. So someone like Hitler, someone like Stalin, someone like, I don't know, Idi Amin, Pinochet, but someone like Kim Jong-un, I mean, how do we know what sort of personality he would have had if he wasn't?
Yeah, that's very different. Yeah.
I mean,
he was born into that, yes.
But that's an extreme example, but even someone like Hitler, someone like Stalin, what would they have been like? There's some evidence that they would have been a problem. But we don't hear, little Hitler prior to rising to power in his 30s or 40s or something, that he was like, cutting people up for fun or, experimenting on roadkill like Dahmer or something. But my point is that we often talk about them as if they must have been that way, but we don't know.
Right. And I think one of the big disconnects is that, again, with some of the dictators, in modern dictator stuff, it's like clearly they are very, very extreme in many of those categories, because you'll hear the stories of like, oh no, they had the guy dismembered in front of them. They had like very sadistic, horrible things, right? Okay. With a Hitler, I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe he went and witnessed the things and like loved it and stuff. I don't know, right? But in general, you can imagine a very similar situation to what happened with Germany, with a leader who still goes and invades countries, with a leader who still actually sets up camps to horribly kill and murder and torture people, right? But who they themselves is not like addicted to that sadism.
Right. Let's take Truman, for example. He authorized the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima,
right,
with known weapons that would indiscriminately kill everyone within a certain radius and cause massive radiation sickness and a slow death to, thousands of other people that were on the perimeter of the blast. And this is women, children, dogs, cats, everybody, like just wiped off. It's the same thing that was happening in other cities with the firebombing that was occurring, but it is like just one device.
But we would never conclude from that, or even the firebombings, oh, Truman must have been a psychopath.
Right, but he killed millions of people. He's the commander in chief, and he knew, and he authorized it specifically with the atomic bomb. It without being in that position of power, or without that circumstance of everything that led up to that. And if you understand World War II and the atrocities that Japan committed around the world, particularly in China and Korea, and the suicidal nature of their defense, island to island, and not only of the military, but of the citizenship, you take all that consideration in and people today will say, well, Truman was a psychopath. He's a sadistic, obviously dark. How could you possibly do that? He's obviously a psychopath. No. If you look at Truman's personality in his life, like that's different. Being in a position of power, being in a context, being in a situation, being called upon, those are completely different circumstances.
Where I wonder a little bit, not about Truman. In fact, the reason I don't wonder as much about Truman, I mean, maybe he was a psychopath, but not from this evidence, right, is because the way he came to power was through a system that actually, is not trying to, even though right now it seems the other way around, but it's not trying to have dictators, right? It's trying to have a balanced system of, you have a Congress, you have a president, and you have executive branch, and you also have the courts and stuff. And it's supposed to balance out so that you don't actually end up with dictators, right?
Yeah.
But so someone can come up in such a system that doesn't, at least outwardly, exhibit a lot of the bad traits. And I'm not talking about even sadism. I'm just talking about like, how do you call it? What do you call the thing with the criminality? Their versatility, or
criminal versatility.
Criminal versatility. You can imagine an Obama or someone that comes up in such a system like ours that seems like, they seem like a fine person, even if they are somewhat narcissistic, even if they are somewhat self-centered, even if they are maybe a little too aggressive with their decisions they make, whatever, right? But then in other systems, you're like, okay, but what's the kind of personality that might have more success when they're surrounded by people that will only respect ruthlessness and viciousness and stuff like that? And in those cases, it's possible, again, it's hypothesis, it's possible that less empathy, more criminal versatility, more maybe even sadism might actually rise to the top. Yeah. It's just that, to your point, we can't run the experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't know. And the way that people talk about it in this simplistic way, that well, all dictators must have dark tetrad traits is like, well, maybe, like with Hitler, just look at, like, in every dictator is, when you actually start naming dictators, if you know anything about their story, they're all really particular. Kim Jong-un is completely different from a Hitler. It's completely different from a Stalin.
Yeah.
Like, these are all fairly, distinct individuals. And with Hitler, we can say, regardless of his rise to power, if we look at him up until, he's, giving these speeches in a pub and no one's listening, at that moment, like, he's just a regular citizen in the city, that reports are that he was weird and traumatized and awkward and a loner, and maybe some evidence that he's a pedophile. Do you know this evidence?
I don't remember this, no.
That he had this potentially romantic, maybe sexual relationship with this girl, this young person. I'm trying to remember the details about it. But anyway.
But that would even seem uncorrelated with the other stuff.
Yeah, but at the very least, that's why I keep coming back to if he had a good love life, if someone loved him, because he was, from all reports, either not interested or wasn't interested in adult companionship, or didn't think he could achieve it, or had trouble achieving it, or something. You know what I mean?
The thing is,
he had his what's her name at the very end?
Eva.
Eva Braun. But and that really, anyway. But there's so much to get into, and experts on this would be like, well, but there is some evidence that prior to that moment in the pub when he's giving this speech and no one's listening, that he did have some grandiosity, some narcissism, and some paranoia.
And I believe that if he hadn't become the Hitler we know, he might have killed a Jewish person at some point.
Yeah, he had some issues and some ideas, and he was passionate, and he was pretty extreme. Like in normal times, he would have been the weirdo that rants and raves while he looks into his pint of beer at the pub. He was that kind of weird loner guy. But the movement and the elites saw him, because they saw the people responding to just how emphatic he was when he spoke. That they're like, we can use him. He's not going to be in power. We'll be in power. And then Hitler actually took power later. But there's some evidence that he lacked empathy. There's some evidence he was immature, some evidence he had anger problems, trauma problems. Does that mean that he had dark tetrad traits? It seems like maybe on the spectrum of psychopathy, maybe. But, there are people that have extreme anger problems and trauma issues, particularly men, who do have baseline empathy, but because of their struggles are acting in an antisocial way,
From all what actually ended up happening during the war and everything, it does seem that at the very least, he had abstracted away the ability to give two fucks about anyone other than him and his surroundings. Like, he didn't even care about his own soldiers towards the end. So I don't know what that is, but certainly it wasn't someone who was like just trying to do good by others.
No.
No. But it is, but to your point, it's like,
well, it depends. Yeah. So the other aspect that is well understood and well researched in some questionable experiments in psychology is that when you dehumanize a population, then anyone is basically capable of anything, or for the most part, not anyone, but normal, good people are capable of sadistic, psychopathic behavior if they're convinced that this group or this individual isn't really human. And that was well established in German society, not because of Hitler, but because of the system and the culture. And Hitler was a part of that. So, and all the people that carried out all of those things.
As weird as it sounds, like when I do my mental analysis of him, I'm not even counting the Holocaust, which is weird, right? Because you're like, what? Isn't that I'm not even counting the Holocaust, because in my mind, by that point, it's like he's so drunk on power and he hates these populations so much that he's like, just like be done with them. Like it's over. Now, does it show a massive lack of care for humanity? Of course it does. But to your point, it's like he doesn't even see him as human at that point, right?
Right. And he might see his humans, his people, as humans, and therefore has empathy for them.
But that's where I'm saying he fails even that test. Other than the ideal of what he thought the Germany should be or whatever, he obviously ends up not actually having empathy for even the future of his own people.
And look, I don't give a fuck about Hitler. Yeah. I'm not defending him at all. But when it comes to evaluating personality, when you understand and you listen to the experts when they talk about this sort of thing, it all depends on what you value and what you're putting forward. So, for example, with him at the very end, Berlin, Russia is in Berlin.
Right.
And all of his generals are like, it's over, Herr Hitler or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's just like, 999.
999,
yeah. And, even personally, apparently, like, congratulates 13-year-old soldiers that are, running into battle with tank busters on their shoulder, and knows absolutely that and all he has to do is say, we surrender, and thousands upon thousands of people, citizens, will not be murdered, not be killed.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do it. Well, obviously he because if he humanizes Germans, then he must be callous. He must have no empathy. But if you believe that the greater good, even for those children, is the glory of the death cult at the end or whatever, the glory of Germany means that we all benefit from a final gasp of defense or retribution, will bring down those dehumanized Russians, those Slavs, and we're better than that. I'm going to go down, and we're all going to go down together with glory, and I'm lifting up Germany. This is the way that him and his people thought. So that is a weird version of empathy that can be twisted. This is what World War II taught us.
Yeah.
That you can have an entire population that can twist reality and still be involved in non-psychopathy, still be involved with empathy, and yet as a society and as individuals carry out sadistic psychopathy.
Again, if it were only, which is, again, sounds crazy, if it were only about the Holocaust and those last few days or moments, I think it's just that for years, since he was no one, all the way through he became something, he did care about himself and his legacy and the idealized version of what he envisioned, but he didn't care about people, right? Like the fact is that he instituted almost right away the death squads and the whatever they were called, the police, to go and grab people, and anyone who spoke against, like, it doesn't matter if they're German or not, you grab them, you kill them. So like he really was just about the ideal glory he wanted to bring and what he thought that represented, not actually about real human beings. Now, again, I don't know what that means as far as, like, that means he's a psychopath. I'm just saying, like, even well before the final stuff, he was always just focused on his glory and the glory of his vision, not really on humans. And I'm saying that from a perspective of like the decisions that were made well before the wars even started were cementing that idea that, like, this is about, in fact, the whole thing was like, it's not about individuals, it's about the greater good of everyone, right? But it was because he's like, yeah, I saw these Wagner operas, and we need to, like, be great Vikings, and we can't be like these little dirty people. But it wasn't like a situation where, like, how can we help the struggling farmers, and how can we, like, that was all secondary. That's like, yeah, well, we got to build a war machine, so we have to, like, revitalize all these things in the purpose of this vision. Yeah. So it tracks that towards the end, yes, by then the only thing left is the glorious vision anyways, so I guess we're just all going down with the ship.
So in a perfect scientific scenario, we would have 1,000 Hitlers, 500 of which we would put into that scenario in the nascent Nazi party in 1933 or whatever the year was, and play out that history and see what happens. And then we'd have 500 where he isn't picked up by the Nazi. There's a different leader or something. And we look at those outcomes and we compare the two groups. And we see, is there a difference?
Right.
Or are there some parallels, in his way when he's 45 and has some power in the world? Does he exhibit sadism and psychopathy and lack of empathy, and to what degree? We don't know is the thing. So when we're talking about sadistic behavior, we don't have to guess or speculate. He committed sadistic behavior. When we want to talk about psychopathic behavior, we don't have to speculate. When we talk about lack of empathy, when we talk about callousness, when we talk about murdering millions of people, we don't have to speculate. We know what happened. But when we're talking about personality traits, we are talking about something that is hard to measure, even on people that ask to be measured. When someone comes into my office and says, please measure my personality, one, that's hard. Two, there are people in my field that are correct in pointing a finger at me and saying that's an impossible, other than the big five, you can't really, you're just making shit up anyway. So for us to look in history at Hitler and say, does he have actual dark tetrad traits? Does he have dark tetrad behaviors? Yes. Does he have those? Did he inherently have a personality? And on what end of the spectrum of dark tetrad? It's a lot of speculation.
Yeah, it's true.
Let's take a break. All right, back from the break. One final short-ish email, I think, although with you and me, it could
short, 5 hours later.
So anonymous listener wrote in about breaking up with a friend, and I thought that, Berto, this might be a good email for you because you've had some friend, and you and I even had a sort of mini friend breakup. Mm-hmm. Anonymous listener, she says, "Hi, I'm a huge fan, and I think I've listened to every episode."
Wow. That's huge.
Yeah. I have a question about a random falling out with a friend. This particular friend and I bonded quite quickly a few years ago. At the time, I had a gut feeling that she wanted to be close too quickly. But she was kind, so I kept an eye on it. As we got closer, she began to get mad at me way too often for my comfort level. But I gave her the benefit of the doubt, and I would reassure her and I would apologize if it felt reasonable. I began to realize, though, that all she did was talk about herself. Finally, she asked me to take accountability for something that I felt was completely unreasonable, and this was something other people witnessed in a group situation, and everyone thought it was completely bizarre that she was asking you to take accountability. For the first time ever, I pushed back, and I said I loved her, but that I simply couldn't let her put this on me, and that I felt she asked me to take way too much responsibility than I needed to. She would apologize. She wouldn't apologize. She didn't apologize, and we basically broke up as friends. And I don't care to try to repair the friendship. I guess I just want to know your thoughts on the situation. I don't like to overuse the word narcissist, but I feel like I have been by a person who was using me the whole time and hiding behind the language of trauma healing and self-care when they were actually being incredibly self-absorbed. I feel exasperated and angry. Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, man. That sounds, assuming the narrative is what you're saying, obviously we're only getting your side, but that sounds highly frustrating. I've had situations for sure, both in very like immediate moments with people, but also like actual long-term friendships that have had problems, and in some cases where they ended. There's been a couple of varieties. One of them was we had a friendship since high school, and then through college, and then through adults, and at different times we butted heads. And at first, similar to the letter, like I tended to just kind of try to reconcile, try to make things right, try to be like, okay, well, but over time, I started getting to the point where it was like, okay, this is not me. Like there's something else going on, and it's getting dumped on me. And then I had to, and obviously I'm pretty sure you know who I'm talking about here. And I had to draw some boundaries. So that's like one case, but I had other cases where it was like, we'd be fine. And then there'd be a blow up, and then we'd have a break for months. And then the person would apologize. We would get back and then be fine. And then another one. And we had like 2 major blowouts, and then eventually that was fine. And then the last time, it was 2019, we have yet to, and I wrote, this is the person I wrote an email to. I don't know if they ever read it or got it actually, but I wrote an email explaining that I had this realization through this podcast of things that I do where you will recall that in my case, it was this realization of like, oh, a lot of times when I'm arguing, I'm not like noticing the other person's emotions, like their state. And I kind of talked about that. And it was me mostly like apologizing for times that I did that, and I wasn't asking for like, therefore, please forgive me. Let's be friends again. I was just apologizing. But that's it. Like we have never reconnected, and it is painful. For a long time, I would keep having dreams where they would show up in my dream, and in my dream we were like reconnecting, and I was like, oh, finally. And then we were friends again. And then I'd wake up, I'm like, oh, damn, that was a dream. And then I've had more immediate, like very short-term things where I met, because they're mentioning narcissism. And I told this story at least once. I was in Long Beach, Washington, and I met someone who was a friend of this other person. And I'm just meeting this person for the first time. I'm like, oh, hi, how's it going? And immediately, I've rarely been with someone that was so obviously narcissistic, and I'm narcissistic, but this is like on a whole other level, because immediately the conversation is all about her world. And I can barely even, like, if I get a word in, it better be to like compliment the thing she's saying. Like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Otherwise I can't really
But sometimes
talk.
they don't even want that.
They don't even want that, yeah.
Because that's you talking.
Right. And so it keeps going. And then they start talking about how amazing their daughter is and all these things. And I remember like, I was like, some of the stuff they were saying actually wasn't amazing at all. It was like all these problems that they're having, but they're painting it in this light, like inaccurate light. So I remember like pushing back, and oh my God, like pushing back as in like, wow, here's my version of pushing back. Wow, that must have been difficult for her, because she said something that her daughter had been, and immediately I saw this weird change, like, oh no, she dealt with it so well, and railroaded, and on she went. I was shocked.
Yeah. By the way, this is a perfect description of someone that in all likelihood suffers from narcissistic personality. Not everyone with narcissistic personality presents this, but people who do this are frequently found to be on the spectrum somewhere, if not, pretty far on the spectrum. And it's this, the vibe that you get is that they are on a runaway train of just telling you things, and they really don't want you to interject, even if you're saying positive things. Because if you say something, even if it's positive, that risks them handing over the keys to the train.
And by the way, every story they're telling is the best of some. Is like the greatest. It's just
even if they're talking about their child, right?
Yeah.
They're not talking about themselves. Right. It's a reflection on them. And when you try to even empathize, what it does is it implies that they have vulnerability or something, which they really don't like. And the vibe that I want people to really focus on when you think about it, because when you see an adult like this, you're just like, narcissist, the self-absorbed. What age? You've had 2 kids of the key age groups. What age is it when kids generally do this, where they just yammer at you and don't want you to interject?
I mean, so for sure, at least up until 8 or 9,
Yeah. But, right. So maybe from like 4 to 8 or something.
The worst probably being 4 or 5. Like I had this trip I took with my older daughter, but at the time she was in fact 4, almost 5. And we were coming back from Colombia, and it was just me and her because my wife was pregnant with our second child. And the whole 4-hour trip from Columbia to Houston, I had to do the Scooby-Doo voices, and I had to pretend with her the whole time. And she was having we couldn't deviate from this plan, right? It was like
Meaning
constant.
she wanted to play Scooby-Doo.
Play Scooby-Doo the whole time. And I could see just
Wait, what does this involve? Like what? Scooby-Doo? Like she wanted you to be Scooby-Doo?
Because we had the little Lego Scooby-Doo pieces, and I would always do the Scooby-Doo voices. But it was like this level of focus, like for 4 hours, she could play Scooby-Doo nonstop, and I had to play for 4 hours. It was like complete. Oh my God!
Right. So she's 4. She doesn't. She doesn't care about your feelings.
Nope.
You don't want her to care about your feelings.
Yeah, and of course, and I'm doing it lovingly, but imagine any other situation where for 4 hours you want to talk to me about something, and that's all we're going to do, and you're going to talk and I'm going to listen for 4 hours.
Right. So analogously, it's the same.
Yeah.
You have an individual that has some emotional need to do an activity, whether it's do a role play situation with Scooby-Doo, or it's them just telling you a story, which is what kids tend to play. Right. Adults tend to tell stories. And what you really need is that someone pays attention to you and does not divert attention away. You don't care about the quality of that attention. You don't care if they want to give you attention. It doesn't matter.
Right.
You just need that attention. Because she could have played on her own.
Right.
She could have done the Scooby-Doo on her own. She needed you. She wanted your attention. She wanted your time. And this person that you're talking about didn't care about you enjoying it, didn't care about your opinion, but really wanted your attention. So when we have a 35-year-old, a 55, or a 82-year-old who does this kind of thing, you think, oh, narcissist. But if you frame it in the developmental sense, it makes all the sense in the world. And they've never been given that when they were that age and younger. So they're stuck at that phase, and they can't get out of it. They have a massive emotional need to be paid attention to, and we have in all likelihood, a survival mechanism that is involved in that. The heuristic, genetically, is that if you're being paid attention to at the age of 0 to 5, then you're more likely to survive, right?
Yeah.
Someone is watching out.
That makes
for you.
sense.
Someone's making sure that you're not going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. You're going to get fed. You're not going to be left behind. And for those that never get that, they're stuck in that survival.
They fear they're going to die because no one's watching the saber-toothed tiger.
It's panic. Yeah, it's utter panic. Yeah. And it doesn't make it any easier when you're standing there staring, bleary-eyed and just like, what? How do I get out of this conversation? But it's not like, I'm going to be self-absorbed today.
Yeah.
That's not what it is.
Yeah.
So, anonymous listener, is narcissism on the table? Maybe. The way you're describing it is in the cluster B area, and people with narcissism can have relationships like this, because I say that under every narcissist is a borderline person. Borderline people are more known to have these quickly escalating relationships that burn out very quickly. But narcissistic people will as well, because they have the same basic abandonment and trauma about not having attachment security. And so people with narcissism will also at times have very quickly escalating close friendships that become intoxicating or even, somewhat weirdly boundary crossing for the other person. And that's kind of what you're describing, is like, she really wanted to move fast. And I was like, whoa, but we really bonded. So I went along with it, but I was like, well, let me look at this. And then after a while, I started realizing, man, all she does is talk about herself. And then I was starting to get like blamed for things. So
that's the aspect that felt most familiar to me, the feeling blamed, because again, not diagnosing this or the other thing, but this experience of, so because it's interesting with people that you're friends with. I often find that I like sharing vulnerabilities that I might have or failings that I might have, because I might get some support, like, oh, that's tough. I'm sorry about that. And B, I personally find it nice to air out things, But I've learned that I have to be careful with some of these types of individuals because, for example, with the person I was referring to in the first story, when I would say something that I was not good at or something I was struggling with, like if I come to you and I say like, man, I'm finding it really hard to go to sleep early, which I am, I'm like finding it really hard to sleep. What would you say? I'm like, hey, Honda, I'm finding it really hard to go to sleep early.
I'd say me too.
Yeah. Like what should I do? Like, do you have any ideas?
You would ask?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first off, I'd ask if you're a night owl and therefore it's not really possible.
Right.
Yeah. You're working against your
already. You are empathizing with me. You're like, yeah, me too. And then you're like, oh, you're not even demonizing my inability to go to sleep early. You're actually saying like, maybe that's what you need to. Okay. There's a different kind of personality where when I say like, oh man, I'm really finding it hard to go to sleep early, the response is going to be something like this. Oh, really? Huh. Have you thought of maybe you're like worried that you're screwing up during the day too much? Or like they start like using it as an in to demonstrate to themselves how much inferior you are to them.
Yeah, well, it's a really good description. Yeah.
And I didn't see it, of course.
Narcissistic people they have a weird ability to find those levers.
Right.
They'll make any conversation into the effort of making you feel inferior, making them superior.
Right.
It's like that, like you saying, "Oh, I've been having," like in my head, I'm like, "How do you
turn that into a bad thing?"
But then you named
exactly.
it,
And so, but I over the years, I started slowly realizing, I'm like, oh, yeah, I have to basically not have those kind of conversations with this person if I want them around in my life at all, because essentially, it's just fodder for their insecurities, and I get nothing out of it. Like I get no support. Instead of getting support, I get like attacked.
Yeah, you feel like shit.
Right. And so it's very interesting.
So imagine being a therapist for one of these people.
Oh, damn.
It's, it's rough.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah.
But I like doing it.
And being empathetic, it makes me feel so bad for that situation, right? Because if you're in those shoes, you're like, I can imagine you're always at the ready. It's like, what's coming at me? You have what? Oh God, yes, thank you. You have a flaw? Great. Oh my gosh. Right. Let me dump all this stuff that I've been holding on you.
Yeah.
And it must be exhausting.
Yeah.
And the way I experienced, which you got to see as well a bit, is where is all this coming from? All this negativity, all this angst, all this anger, all this pointing fingers, all this blaming. Because when you're not aware of the inner workings, it seems to come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it's disproportionate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anonymous listener, the last thing I'll say is that it sounds like from your story that you did everything right. You met someone that you really bonded with. You watched the boundaries in the beginning, but you went with it because it was a really close relationship and you were really bonding. That's great. That doesn't happen every day. And then you started realizing, wait, they rarely ask me any questions. I'm always the one that's asking them questions. They don't seem interested in me. And okay, that's not great. But wait, now I'm being blamed for something that I don't think I'm to blame for. I'm asking my friends around me, yeah, I'm not to blame. And actually, I kind of get blamed for a lot of things. I kind of get put down in a lot of scenarios. I think I'm going to push back on this. And a real friend, someone that's really close, they're not going to react wonderfully to this, but there'll be some conversation about that. There'll be some effort, some attempt, right? In general, when you and I would have a fight or something, and we would have the initial attempt at resolution, it's not like we both walked away going like, oh my God, he totally understands me. You know what I mean? But there was enough of an effort from the other side where it's just like, well, I could see that he was kind of trying. He's still a dick sometimes, but but I see that right. he's putting in some effort, or he's not doubling down, for example. And so it's different than that for you, anonymous listener. She was just like, I can't believe that, blah, blah, blah. And she wouldn't apologize. And then you brought, was there a possible way to work this? Maybe if you had a different approach, or if there was another attempt at a conversation, might that have potentially, had some fruit to it? I don't know. But it's also possible, given the scenario that you're laying out, that it was kind of doomed from the start, and you either would have to just deal with feeling like shit or break up, which, Berto, you're talking about having,
a
breakup for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But, you only have one life to live.
Yeah.
And you only have so much time on the planet. Is this how you want to spend your time? Is the question you want to ask yourself.
Right. And by the way, at the time, it wasn't like I didn't try anything, meaning in 2019, this is the other story, the one where eventually we haven't talked since. In 2019, the next day I tried sending a message, it was ill received. And then basically the person told me like, they don't see the point in spending time with me. And I was like, okay. And I'm not one to beg. Also, I was hurt myself. I was like, I don't like how I was treated here, so I guess that's it.
Yeah.
And then that was it, which is sad. But
yeah.
But I guess, one thing that I told myself, and maybe this could help in this case.
But on your point of just now, the other one from high school, that was 20-year-long friendship, that one you gave dozens of second chances. Like straight communication and boundaries.
And I was younger, so I didn't really know.
But later on, when I was there, there were, direct.
Exactly.
I was there during, and you were very kind and direct, and I think reasonable, and it still, still didn't work, and so. And
I did come to realize, like I said, I was like, oh, this isn't about me, and that kind of almost gave me, like, I'm not angry. I'm just like, oh, that's sad, and we stayed friends. We're still friends. I have boundaries.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in the other case, unfortunately, it ended. And
we still have great times with him. And
yeah. And with, one thing that comes to mind is that, like, this might help the listener too. When that happened in 2019 and it was a breakup, and it's been a breakup since, I told myself, okay, this doesn't happen with all your friends. Meaning, it's not like you are a terrible person and you end every relationship like this. Because I needed to tell myself, I needed some self-validation. I'm like, wait, am I just a bad person? Like, did I screw this up so terribly? And I did make mistakes, and I've admitted that, oh, wow, I do. But I also had to tell myself, wait a minute. No, you have a lot of relationships, a lot of friendships. You're not this person that just ruins friendships left and right. And that was important. So in this case, I'd say, like, look around you, make sure that you are acknowledging, like, the other friendships you have, the other relationships you have, and remind yourself, like, oh, right, yeah, I'm a part of a community. One relationship maybe went south and sour, and maybe you were part of it too, but it doesn't define you as, like, that was important for me.
Yeah. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.